welcome to Maximum Attack Rallying and to part 2 of this special video on the future of British rallying. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, well, I would recommend that you go back and watch part 1. As I said, the format is a little bit different this time because it's a very big topic, as you can imagine. This is spread across 2 videos, which are about half an hour each. That means that the best place to watch them is on YouTube. So if you're watching on Instagram, you'll be watching a little bit of a preview right now. So if you want to watch the full video, make sure you just jump to YouTube with the tag up there in my bio. If you're watching on YouTube already, good, you don't have to do anything. You can sit back, relax, listen to what I have to say, listen to what some of my amazing followers have to say, and you can obviously shout at the screen if you disagree. You could comment down there if you want, rather than shouting, because I'd still, even after this video, I would like to hear what people think. So just a very quick recap. Motorsport UK have asked rally folk to give their feedback on what people would like to change and what people see as the future of the sport in the UK. If you want to get involved and comment directly to them, which I would encourage you to do, email them at rally@motorsport or rally@motorsportuk.org. So email them, send them your thoughts. If you agree with anything in these videos, send them. If you have your own ideas, send them, because I think now is the time to make changes. We're going through a really difficult phase with the pandemic. Lots of events aren't happening, so this is probably the time to improve things. So, as with the last video, I want to get back to what you have to say. So I've got some more comments. At the end of part 1, we heard from Liam and a question about Mark II escorts, which is a bit of a controversial topic. You are either on one side of the fence or the other with Mark IIs, it seems. I'm definitely on one. So if you want to hear what I think about that, watch part 1. I'm not going to talk about it here. I want to get back to Liam's other comments because I think they're also really good. This one is similar to the first one, or it's related to. So he says, we all know it was better back in the day, but we need to move on. I think this is a really interesting point because I think in sport we are very, very guilty of looking back on the past with rose-tinted specs. Very guilty. And I think rally people, motorsport people probably, are among the worst for it. So I think the question I would ask is, was it better back in the day? That's an interesting one, isn't it? I think you could argue that in some ways, yes, it was. I think if you go back to the early 2000s or to the 90s, and the level of manufacturer involvement that we had was very good. In the British Championship, we had 7 manufacturers, I think, at one point, which is amazing. World Championship was similar. So I think that was good. I think the events in some ways were better. I think the fact that we've lost some events from the world scene, like Corsica, is a real shame. So I do think there are things that we miss. But that being said, I think what you also have to consider is the events and how competitive they were. So if you go back to the Group B, for example, which is kind of seen as the benchmark by most people, well, rallies in the Group B era were often decided by minutes. So when you compare that to now, what we've seen since the current cars came in, where rallies can be decided by 1/10 of a second, I would perhaps argue that things aren't necessarily better. Yes, we don't have as many manufacturers, and yes, the events are shorter, so the ability to build such a big lead is not there. But I think that shorter format can actually lead to much more dramatic competition. And also in terms of the coverage, and I moan a lot about coverage, and there is a lot that could be improved about coverage. When you consider the access we have to rallying, you can, especially in British rallying, the access is terrible, I will grant you that, but at world level, the amount of footage that you can consume of a car on the stages is now far beyond anything we have ever seen. So for the fan, access to stage footage is unrivaled to anything we've seen in the past. Yes, the coverage to attract new people is terrible, and as I said in the last video, when you watch documentaries like Drive to Survive on Netflix about Formula One, it reminds you of how bad the coverage is and how much better we could make things. But I think there are some good things, so I think it's interesting. I think that's a really interesting point. I think there are things that we should definitely aim to improve, and there are still things we can learn from the past rather than trying to change things for change's sake. But I also think, certainly at world level, we need to be a little bit grateful for what we've got and perhaps not always look backwards. But the point that Liam is making is absolutely right. It doesn't matter how good the past was, even if you think that the past was 1,000 times better than what we have now. It's gone. There's no point complaining about it. We have to look forward and see what we can do to make the sport work now. So I totally agree with that. Last one from Liam, attitude towards EV and hybrid cars. Oh boy, this is a big one, isn't it? This is a really big one. I am not the biggest fan of electric cars. I still believe that there are questions about their sustainability. That being said, those questions in the here and now, you could argue, are largely irrelevant, because if you look at the way things are going, this week alone we've had announcements from both Jaguar and Ford saying that by the end of the decade their range will be fully electric. Well, that in itself means that we have to look at this, doesn't it? It means we have to begin to look at how those cars work and how we can integrate them. The big challenge with full electric cars for me is the disparity that you have. So if you take a Renault Zoe, which is at the kind of lower end of electric cars, and a Tesla Model 3, which is at the other end, or a Porsche Taycan, the gulf in performance is massive, isn't it? I think the challenge is perhaps how we integrate those into the class structures that we have, how they would fight with internal combustion cars, but also how you kind of create a slightly more level playing field between different types of electric cars. So that's a real challenge. That being said, we have to step up to it, don't we? We have to find a way to make it work. Similarly with hybrids, you can argue the same thing, because there's lots of different approaches to hybrid, whether it's plug-in, mild hybrid, whatever. So we have to look at that and we have to make it work. It's a difficult one, isn't it? For me, I think for now, I would at the very least be trying to encourage MSUK to engage with the debate, encourage people, create competitions, who can come up with a car that works, give incentives, who can, design a workable hybrid or electric car, maybe even start a hybrid cup as part of the British Championship or the National Asphalt Championship, to just try and get people out there. There's a Toyota in the US are running a Prius in the IRA series, and it's a basically standard road car, but they're doing it to see if it works. So surely someone could do that here. Go up the scale, quite a long way up the scale. Hayden Paddon has created a fully electric rally car with a small team, a good team, but a small team. Shouldn't the UK, which is kind of the hub of global motorsport engineering, be able to do that? It's a good question, isn't it? I think it's something that we really have to look at. I don't know the answers to that one because I'm not nearly clever enough, but I think it's something we have to consider. Next question from Tim. Would moving back to Group A rules be best for everyone? This is such a difficult question for me. I can see why this appeals. I think as a huge fan of Group A and that era, I can see why people loved it. On the one hand, I can see why it ended, because manufacturers just lost appetite for building cars like the Escort Cosworth and the Subaru Impreza. They just became too niche, too expensive, and they didn't want to do it anymore, and not every manufacturer wanted to do it. So I think you could argue that moving to the WRC regulations gave Peugeot, Citroën, Toyota and others the chance to join or continue, in the case of Toyota. That being said, if you look at the car market right now in four-wheel drive cars, well, the Golf R, Mercedes A35, A45, Audi S3, RS3, we actually have quite a lot of four-wheel drive performance cars out there. The problem is do those manufacturers want to get involved in the sport again? And that's where the kind of FIA homologation becomes problematic, and maybe having some local homologation would be useful. So I think there's an argument for and against it right now. I think, there are, those cars have just naturally come along and are much easier to make than they used to be, because, the technology has moved on so much. and four-wheel drive isn't actually such a difficult thing to put into a road car anymore, because Haldex type systems, which is what Volkswagen and most people use, are now so easy and so much better. You don't have that bespoke need for such a bespoke body, because most bodies are designed to hold four-wheel drive anyway. So I think that's very interesting. I actually think, for me, I would like to see, rather than Group A, is actually Group N with these cars. I would love to see a category where a team could create a Group N Golf R or Audi S3, which was nearly a production car. And if you were using it on relatively low-level events, I don't actually think it would be that bad. Yes, if you wanted to take it into the forest or to the Acropolis or something ridiculous like that, it would break. But for a tarmac single-venue event, a Golf R would deal with that fairly easily, I would have thought. So I think there's an opening there. For me also, I would come back to the class structure a little bit that we have in the UK. So right now, if you're not familiar, the class structure is very, very open. Most events run a handful of classes based on engine capacity, so up to 1 litre, up to 1.4, up to 1.6, up to 2 litre, and over 2 litre, and then they tend to junk all the four-wheel drive cars in together. Well, the problem you end up with in that situation is that the person that wins, whichever class it is generally the person that has the most money to spend. So in the over 2 litre class, for example, that's generally won by an Escort, because Escorts are popular, and it's won by the guy that can afford the Millington engine and the sequential gearbox and the Riga dampers. And if there's 4 of those guys, they have a battle, and it comes down to the driver. I think for me, and I think this is a really big turn-off for a lot of potential competitors, is if you don't have the budget for that, if you don't have the budget for the Millington powered Escort or the Super 1600 car or the Nova with a sequential gearbox and a 200 horsepower 1400 engine, there's nothing to fight for. There's no incentive to compete. Go across to circuit racing, and they have feels like hundreds of classes. They have production-based championships where modifications are heavily restricted, and it feels like we're missing a trick. And with the loss of Group N, we've lost that. And it would seem to me that it would be fairly easy to go some way to getting that back. For me, I would have a split of the current class system. So I'd leave it as it is. So you have your 1.4, 1.6, 2 litre classes, but just have it split in half. So you have open and restricted. And in the open section, you run it as we run it now, so you can do whatever you want within the current regulations. And in the restricted class, you can't have throttle bodies, you can't have a sequential gearbox, you can't have remote reservoir dampers. Just restricting those 3 things alone would significantly reduce the performance of a car and significantly reduce the cost. So you would then give people who are on a lower budget something to aim for, some form of competition, rather than just being an also-ran and just having to look through the timesheets and try and work out, what a similar car is and how they compare to it. So I think for me, that is a simple way to do it without having to bring back a much more rigid structure like Group A and Group N. It kind of enforces that somehow within the existing structure. And also, I would dictate that nationally. So right now, with the class structure, each event or championship can basically choose its own classes. And I understand giving that freedom, but at the same time, what that means is if you live in Essex and build a rally car for your local championship, you might decide, well, actually, I'm bored of this, I'm going to go and compete in Cheshire. But their championship could run to different rules, different class system. So what's the point? That doesn't make any sense to me. I think you should have these rules applied nationally. Yes, if a championship wants to do something different, maybe, but at least have a basic structure that works across the UK, but also caters for the fact that people have different amounts of money to spend on the sport, because it's the people with not a lot of money that we need to be attracting. The people with lots of money aren't a problem, because there's lots of World Rally cars out there, there's lots of expensive Escorts out there. But for newcomers, you need to offer them something. So that would be my solution. Again, I've suggested it, but I don't know if anyone will listen. Right, moving on. Let's move on to Tom's comments. Tom, for me, is one of the most important people in this debate. not blowing smoke up your backside, Tom. But I've spoken to Tom a little bit, both on social media and on the British Rally Forum. Tom is a newcomer. Tom is trying to get into the sport, and I think he is exactly the person that Motorsport UK need to be listening to. The people that want to come in are the people whose view we need to hear. So Tom's got a couple of comments. Firstly, he talks about barriers to entry, lower the barriers to entry, social media presence, and regularly updated and modern websites. Oh God, this is such a huge... I could talk about this for an hour, but I'm going to try and talk about it in a couple of minutes. Absolutely. One of the biggest problems we have, in my view, is our lack of engagement with people through medias that they use. I know lots and lots of people that are into cars, lots and lots of people that are younger than me and into cars, and most of them do not care about rallying and barely even know it exists. If you look at drifting, for example, which is still growing quickly, their use of social media is miles better than ours, miles. And if you look at car culture, more generally, if you look at the kind of influencer world, there are people that are making substantial amounts of money just by walking around going, look, there's a Ferrari, look, there's a Porsche, look, there's a Lamborghini, or look, I've bought a Ferrari. And the reason they can say, look, I've bought a Ferrari, is because they're walking around shooting random videos of cars. That is the power of social media, and it is a power that we are just not harnessing. I think the problem you've got is that clubs, motor clubs, are very, very good at organising events. They're very good at mobilising marshals. They're very good at planning routes and doing all of that hard work involved in making events actually happen. The problem is that promotion, marketing, PR is a very, very different beast, and it requires a very different set of skills. And I think we're just asking far too much of motor clubs to do that themselves. They need help. Motorsport UK is the body that should be making this side of it happen. They should be helping clubs to come up with good websites. They should be helping clubs to run social media, but also running effective social media campaigns themselves. You can't rely on clubs to do that because they just don't have the manpower to do it. So I think for me, I think that's absolutely right. We really, really need to do that. The barrier to entry thing, I think, is a big issue. Tom goes on to talk about having a level between targa rallies and stage rallies, and I think that's right. I'll come on to that in a second, but I think for me, if you get the promotion right, if you get the social media right, I think those barriers to entry actually become less important because you're selling something to people. I think you have to think of rallying, and all sport is a product ultimately. Formula One and football know this. It's a product that you're selling to people, and I think that's the big issue. That's the big thing that we're missing. So I would certainly advocate that. I would absolutely advocate, and going off on a bit of a tangent, sorry Tom, clubs themselves, I think we need to have a bit of a rethink. In the UK, where I was brought up in Norfolk. So in Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire, there's probably 10 motor clubs, which for me now is totally unnecessary. If you go back 30 years when the internet didn't exist, meeting people in pubs and all of that, yes, absolutely get it. It was how people integrated and met with each other and socialised. Nowadays, you don't need that. I think for me, I would have a North West Motor Club, a North East Motor Club, a East Midlands, West Midlands, South East, East Anglia, whatever you want to call it, and you could probably have 10 or 12 across the entirety of the UK, and that would allow those clubs to share resources, and it would make all of these jobs that they're doing easier. There's so much work that's being duplicated across this disparate network of tiny little motor clubs. It's very 1970s, and it's not the 1970s anymore. And I think we really need to move a lot of the structure behind the sport forward and adapt to this more modern way of working, and it would just make life a lot easier for everyone. Getting back to the talk about stages between Targa and full stage rallies, I agree with that. I think there's a bit of a gap going from Targa events, which you can do in a standard road car, to stage events is a huge jump. Finding that middle level is very difficult. I think the big problem that rallying has and motorsport has is the ladder just isn't very good. Look at racing and you've got a very clear progression. You start doing track days, you get into it, you want a competitive element, you can do MSV track day trophy type events, javelin sprint events, and then into circuit racing. The difference between a good quality track car and a circuit racing car is tiny. It's an extinguisher or two. Rallying is much stricter. The cars are a bit more complex and require a bit more stuff, and that is problematic. I think for me, I would look at the structure a bit more at the lower end, perhaps below Targa and Stage personally. I think this idea of getting people involved through auto tests, auto solos. I've tried to talk to people that do track days about doing that, and they are not interested. Not interested. Dodging cones at 20 miles an hour on an airfield compared to doing 150 miles an hour around Silverstone in your RS3 or M3. Sorry, you're barking up the wrong tree there in my view. I would personally be looking at the track day market as a means of encouraging participation. I would forget about auto solo and auto test in that role. Yes, they're good events, I have nothing against them, and I know a lot of people enjoy them, but they are an event for people that are existing fans of motorsport. They are not an event for encouraging new people, in my view. So I would forget that. I'd forget it. I would go track days, and then I would, and this is again something that has to come from Motorsport UK, rally track days, which currently run at Anglesey only, as far as I'm aware. I think maybe a couple of events run I think Three Sisters might run test days. For me, rally track days are the future, because they are a means of a person being able to move from a regular track day to a rally track day to get a taster to doing a full stage event. Motorsport UK should be getting every circuit that is on the circuit rally calendar, the Motorsport News circuit rally calendar. Every one of those circuits should be running at least one rally track day a year. Every one. Even if Motorsport UK have to contribute towards the cost. Because it's just so obvious. So obvious as a means of encouraging people from track days to rallying rather than from track days to circuit racing. So I actually think doing things like that would reduce the barriers to entry, because I think it would just encourage people to get involved. So that's my take on it. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate people getting involved. It was really great to hear your thoughts, and I would again urge you to contact Motorsport UK yourselves. I just want to touch on a couple of other things. He says, looking down to scroll down. Big topic, sustainability. I've got 5 minutes or so to talk about this. I'm going to dive around a bit, so bear with me. I'm going to go through a bit of a list of things here. Sustainability is a topic that we can't keep hiding from. We can't keep pretending that no one cares about the environment, because more and more people care. More and more people don't want us driving about in fast cars in the forests, on closed roads, making a load of noise and annoying people. Yes, it's very exciting. Yes, a lot of people enjoy it, but not everyone does. And it's very difficult to make motorsport appear sustainable or be sustainable, because inherently it is cars being driven around for fun. But there are still lots of things you can do. Rallying is in a difficult position of being one of the sports where implementing electric cars is hard because of the geographical spread of the event. It means people tend to do a lot of road miles, and that makes EVs difficult. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things we can do. I saw a fantastic discussion on the British Rally Forum recently, and so many ideas came up of things that we could do to just make the sport a bit greener, or at least appear a bit greener. And I'm just going to list some of them. Carbon offsetting, carbon neutral service parks, tree planting, self-repair of roads, which is something that Rally for Wales are already doing in Wales and should be rolled out across the UK. Limiting the number of tyres people can use and the type of tyres they can use to reduce road damage. The encouragement of turbocharged, downsized engines, hybrid cars, electric cars. Smaller routes, again, go back to EEP, compact routes with less road mileage means less fuel being burned. Everyone's a winner. Partnering with manufacturers and dealer groups to use hybrid and electric cars for officials on events, so you don't have as many petrol and diesel cars being driven around for clerk of the course or whoever it may be. Working, this is not strictly sustainable, but I think it's important, working with education to promote STEM subjects, technology, engineering, maths. There's just so many things that we could be doing that would just enhance the reputation of the sport without actually having any meaningful difference on the competition. That's before you get into making rally cars electric. Just things, if you can partner with a manufacturer on a big event, which is not unheard of. This sort of thing is happening already and has happened on Rally GB. I think the Corbeau Rally a couple of years ago had cars from a local Ford dealer. If you can do that, but all of the cars are hybrid or electric, depending on what they're used for, well, that's a really good message to send to people, isn't it? That's saying that rallying in the UK is cleaning up its act and is responsible. Same with planting trees in forests, contributing the carbon offsetting thing that people have talked about. Adding you would add a few pounds to an entry fee to offset most of your carbon. I know carbon offsetting is controversial and it isn't perfect, but it would make a significant difference to the PR of an event if you can have these little positive messages about what you're doing. And we cannot ignore it. We cannot continue to smoke around in carb-fed Escorts and 205s with our heads in the sand thinking that no one cares, because they do care. Getting back to the BRC, and I think this is a really good point to finish on, both in terms of sustainability and PR, is the BRC needs to be the leader in this. All of those things I've just listed should be a given for the BRC in whatever form it takes. All of these incentives, carbon neutral, offsetting, electric official cars, wherever possible, all of that is not actually that difficult to implement. But the big thing for me in terms of sustainability is as soon as hybrid Rally 2 cars are available, they should be in the BRC. We should have them. If we can't have them by 2023, they should be in by 2024. That's a given, because it's an obvious thing to sell the benefits to, and hopefully those cars won't be too expensive. More than that is that the Opel Adam Cup in Germany has now been replaced by they've replaced the petrol-powered Adams with electric Corsas. Well, why aren't we using those in the UK? I know that there has been talk of it. I hope it comes to pass. In my view, if that electric Corsa series is not part of the BRC in 2022, then Motorsport UK have failed. They have failed in their job of making the UK rally scene sustainable and growing it. That is the biggest thing they could be doing, because if you can shout from the rooftops that you're running electric rally cars in the UK, even if you have to change some of the event formatting to accommodate them, that is a huge win for our sport, and we have to do it. That, to me, is the biggest single step that we could take right now until the technology improves to make rallying appear greener. Just a final thing, going back to the promotion, and I've already touched on the fact that clubs need help with this, but Motorsport UK, the biggest thing they could do for me is to step up the promotion, make the BRC a big deal again, make rallying a big deal again, and you can do that with your sustainability initiatives. You can do that with better use of social media. All of these things are the area where Motorsport UK really, really have to step up to the plate. A lot of the problems in the sport would be fixed if the sport was more popular. We wouldn't be getting told by Forestry England that we need to become more sustainable if we were bringing them masses of money. We wouldn't be struggling with local residents complaining about events if the economic case for these events was indisputable. And in most cases, it is indisputable, because if you have a big rally coming to town, the amount of income it generates in terms of hospitality is massive. But we just do a terrible job of sharing that message, and we do a terrible job of showing people. I'm going to bring it up again, I do this a lot. If you go to Ypres, sit in the centre of town outside a restaurant, have a meal, and you're surrounded by rally cars and people, crowds and crowds of people. So you will always get miserable gits who look at that and think, I can't get home, traffic's really bad. But every business owner in that town is going to be saying, wow, this is brilliant, I'm fully booked. And that is how you make rallying positive, isn't it? You're selling the benefits to people, and that's what we really, really need to do. So part 2 is at 30 minutes, so it's time to shut up, isn't it? Firstly, I want to thank everyone who contributed, who sent me your questions. Thank you. Really good feedback. I would urge all of you to send that to rally@motorsportuk.org. Please do that. Any of you watching, please send them what you think. If you agree with stuff in this video, send it to them. I would like you to comment below if you agree as well. If you disagree, I would like you to comment even more. But again, if you disagree, send that to Motorsport UK as well. Because now is the time, now is the time to make changes. Now is the time to step up and actually drag rallying in the UK, kicking and screaming into I was going to say the 21st century, maybe even the 20th. We are so far behind. Go to Europe. Once all this travel nonsense is over, I urge you, go to Belgium and look at how they're running events compared to us. Look at the crowds they attract compared to us. Look at the cars they use compared to us. And you will soon see how far behind we are. Anyway, I'm over 30 minutes, and I said that this was going to be about an hour, and it's already more than that, so I'm going to shut up. But if you enjoyed this, I'd be very grateful if you liked and subscribed. If you've got this far in, you're obviously watching on YouTube, because you couldn't be watching on Instagram, so I'd be very grateful for that, because I would like to do a bit more on YouTube, because I am going to try and do some longer form stuff in the future once all of these restrictions are out of the way. If you've jumped across to YouTube from Instagram, I thank you. Next week's rally video will be a bit more back to normal, and probably a bit of a look at the upcoming Arctic Rally, so please tune in for that. But I'm going to wrap up there, say thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you agreed. If you didn't agree, let me know, because ultimately I think this is all about having a good debate about the topic. So thanks for watching. I will catch you all again very, very soon.